I'm a React developer now.
I heard.
You did? It's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You know what? It's the first time I've actually sat, because we've played with React over the years, but sitting down for, 2 days, like in half of the time, and just working on it and like struggling through the issues and stuff, you start to see what they mean when they say it's like it feels good to use it. Like Yehuda's talked about this before. This is a spot where React kind of nailed, and something that they're still working on, trying to get better in Ember. You just want it to feel like you don't get interrupted in your flow as much. Whether it's taking a big thing, grabbing some template, throwing it in a function up here, and just calling the function down there and never leaving the file. Whether it's like the auto formatting, the tooling, like all of that stuff, it's true what they say. It's like, it just feels like you're in a flow, you're in this hacker flow, and you're just like, you see the matrix code falling in front of you. You know what I mean? As opposed to like, oh, let me stop this and like, should I create a new file? Nah, like I'm just not going to. But that interrupts you,
I get that. Is there like a point where you're like, oh, okay, now's a good time. I should like create a bunch of...
Yeah, I think the problem is that you've been in that flow for a while, and then you stop, you go get coffee, and you come back, and you're like, what have I done?
Who did this?
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like, we have this nice little iPad Pro here, and we want to get a dashboard on it. That's what I was making the React app in, also to learn how to use Mirage in React. And that's like the dashboard ended up becoming like this 500 line thing. And then I wanted to pull it out, and it's like, okay, what's happening? Like just a bunch of code. Whereas like whenever I make new apps in Ember, I'm just so comfortable in Ember. It's like, okay, let's make a new route, even demos for EmberMap videos.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, define a new route, make a new folder here. And I type in like ROU, enter, and it scaffolds out the route and the controller. And then I have like if you look at my demo apps or even my little side project apps in Ember, they'll have like, 8 files, and each one will be like, 24 lines, and they'll be like gorgeous. Like they'll have like a little bit of state, like 2 actions. Everything looks the same.
Yeah.
Every Ember app looks the same. Like all of those side project apps look the same. Any Ember developer could see right away. This was like a 200 line script to basically. I mean, it's awesome. It's awesome, but it's also you can just see where the conventions would be nice.
I wonder if over time that you'll start to like flex that muscle and learn. You're like just right away. Okay, I'm going to break this thing up. Sort of like how we do in Ember, like you were saying.
Right. But yeah, it's really cool. The Prettier is awesome. I missed that immediately when I went back to like working on the EmberMap video, just having the things snap into place when you save it. Although my Atom format, like if anyone knows, my Atom editor is like trying to auto format as I navigate around, which is really killing me. Like it messes with your stack, like your history stack. So if I try to edit something and then I want to undo it, it's like you can't it's like hard to undo because it's like trying to reformat things as you're it's like messed up. I want the Prettier thing to only work when I save it. But because it happens without like in between saving, just from navigation, it's like really weird. So but man, Prettier, it would be really nice to, there's no reason, like obviously conceptually there's no reason, but like having used it now, there's no reason why Ember development shouldn't feel like that, with like templates and code auto completing and like local helpers and local functions and stuff like that. I think a few changes would really improve the feeling of it from a DX perspective in Ember. So I think it's good for folks to try it out and see it's always good to see good ideas in different systems. And then conversely, like what are the good ideas in Ember that aren't in like that vanilla, like create React app. And it's like, the routing stuff was like super easy. Go to the routing, getting started for React Router, install it, feels right at home. And I know there's like a million more things you can do, but just in terms of like, I think the interesting thing is like, who's nailing the progressive disclosure of complexity? That to me is like, as someone wanting to get something done, coming with the experience of like 4 or 5 years of Ember and understanding at a high level, like how React works or how Vue works and wanting to just get it done. That's a really interesting question. I think if you nail that, you nail the onboarding experience.
That's just like onboarding for medium-sized, even small teams.
Just for a solo hacker. I mean, again, something else Yehuda has said is he believes that the weekend warriors are the folks who drive adoption. And on the one hand, you can say that's ridiculous, that you're about to you talk to someone who's been building an app for 3 or 4 years at a company, and you ask the company, how did y'all choose this decision? I mean, this is a huge investment, right? You're using these 6 libraries together and you've bet your business on it. I imagine there was some great deliberation as to how you chose these set of technologies to work with. Actually, no, it's most of the time I was super productive with this thing over the weekend. I was tired of working with this legacy thing at work, and I came in and we started using this because it was super productive.
Yeah.
That is like an adoption strategy.
Totally. My weekend experiment showed that like, wow, this would be awesome to use at work. And then I snuck it into work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, and all the product managers coming to my desk asking me to get stuff done, they were happier and happier. So we just kept using it. I mean, really. Yeah. And like that's, for better or for worse, that is the actual adoption strategy that drives a lot of real tech adoption at real companies.
Yeah.
So,
and you know, if you frame it so you only have a weekend to show off your tool set, then yeah, that progressive disclosure, like that becomes really, really important.
Really important. When you're in that mode that I was in the last 2 days, every little thing that stops you from flow is you're like running out of light. It's like you have Zelda hearts and it's like bloop, bloop, bloop. And then like you're just losing hearts. And, you know, if I'm just using state, like I understand how state works in React, and I understand that setting state triggers a re-render. That's like bread and butter, base level foundations of React. And I've never gotten confused by that. But then it's like you get into a point where you don't want to just use that anymore because you're just passing state all around. How's the fastest way to kind of go to the next level, share something beyond just that? And then it's like, if you have to go from like use state to like use context plus use reducer, and it's a big jump because there wasn't a smooth path there. When I immediately wanted to reach for some of the things that I was used to in Ember, having the notion of an identity map, notion of a global store of data, then it became a larger jump. And I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of hard.
What was that like? Did you have to learn, did you like go to the docs and have to learn like what is the mapping from Ember to how do I get a service in React? What is the mapping?
Kind of. And I kind of knew what I was going to eventually need. I knew that context was the way to, you know, avoid the drilling issue. It was a way to like a backdoor to a global singleton thing. And so I knew context is eventually what I was going to want. But the path there was like, yeah, a little confusing. Also, like if you go to the docs, you're like, okay, let me use context. Let me use an effect. Like, well, let's just take context. So let me use context here. So I go to the docs and it's like, most things are handled just fine with state and passing props. So you probably shouldn't use context. It was something like that. It was like when to use context, when not to use context. But even in the app I was making, which was super simple, one model type, I wanted not to use props very early on, and not for everything. So just like in Ember, you know, we have Ember data, but then we would do toggle is showing is true and false to hide and show a modal.
And that would be local to the component.
Local component state. Like none of our Ember apps do not use local component state. Like we use it all over the place. But for global concerns, like the database collection of to-dos that every component in your to-do app needs, you know, you immediately want an easier way to access to CRUD all of those, that global collection. Basically, you have a global collection of data that's global for the app, and then you have like list of row items, like where you click and turn them into a form. That's definitely local state. You know, they shouldn't have anything to do with each other. But like if you have a to-do form over here and like a to-do count over here, and like you're showing them on 2 different routes, they all refer to the same global collection of to-dos. So to me, there needs to be an easier way to get there. So this is the thing. Use state is local to a component, and then context is a way to have some state shared between components without having to explicitly pass it through. But because context is scoped to like a tree of the component, a subtree of your component hierarchy, you have to do a lot of wiring to get it to work. Whereas I think when you start with a React app or an SPA, you have a need for local state, like is showing that you toggle true and false. And then you definitely very quickly want some notion of a global singleton store of data somewhere. that can be shared. So I feel like there could be a pre-wired global context object that they could give you, and it's more like to get you going and then to teach you how to use context elsewhere in your app, because it's a more flexible thing for sure, but it's also lower level. But there's a gap there.
I see. Cool.
So that was really interesting and just fun, to, see the compare and contrast.
Nice.
It's also cool because like Mirage is basically working in React, so that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I a few times I looked over your shoulder and would pair on something, and it kind of dawned on me like 5 minutes into it that like, oh, holy crap, we're using Mirage.
Yeah,
it's like I'm so used to using Mirage, I just expect it everywhere.
Yes,
but it really was just like, wow.
It is fun too, like as a user, just using it. It's like, yeah, this is actually the experience I want, because there was nothing like Ember data out of the box. As I was working on like a to-do form, and you save it, you have like a local copy of the to-do. There's no Ember data model. There's no singleton anything. So I have my local JSON, and like I save it and it works. But then like, how do I get it back into like, okay, I guess I'll create a list of to-dos at the root of my app and use that as like my store. But now I have to write some code to update that after a successful save. And so you start to get confused trying to keep it all in your head about, okay, I have like this local version of a to-do. Also, there's like no to-do model. So you're just like duck typing basically. You have like a Pojo that has like a text and an author key, and like that's a to-do, but like there's nothing else. It's just an object. Mm-hmm. So to keep that in mind, my local to-do of the form, and then I save it and I clear that out and I make sure I push it into the array. And then it's like, oh, and I want to make sure it's in the server as well. And so it's actually really nice to have like the server.db in the console. And I was thinking it'd be really nice to have like a viewer of it, like some sort of UI for Mirage. So I actually got, after all of this indirection, really, it made it to the server and it persisted correctly. So, and like also this is where I want to start writing tests, and I haven't even tried that yet in React because I'm not even sure what that looks like yet. But it was just nice as a developer to have that at every level,
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. A lot of React tutorials don't deal with persistence. I think that's something that Ember is good about, is like taking that problem head on, even if there's some things we think that could be improved about it. Like you're building an SPA and you're going to have a server. It's not like, oh, what's a server? What's a database? Like we're front-end developers. Like, no, we're building a web app. So there's just a surprising lack of information and guidance out there, both from official React sources and also from like blog posts and stuff about dealing with the full life cycle, like actually persisting data.
Yeah. I wonder if this is a problem with like you want to cut off a small problem space.
Yeah.
So you deal with just a view layer, but then that can, it makes it easy to talk about, easy to advertise, but then it could, in the case of docs, it's like, okay, if we're just a view layer, it's hard to talk about a database.
Right.
So
it's also made me think about, I think it was Dan Freeman whose blog post talked about trying to come up with tools that are outside of the Ember bubble and making sure that when there's good opportunities we can work with folks across all web technologies. And, that's what we're trying to do with Mirage, because it doesn't really have anything to do with Ember in particular. It just has to do with the fact that it's serving up a front end that is using Ajax to communicate its data. So then it's like you start doing something like this and you're like, well, all these concepts I know and love from Ember, like Ember data, how much of that is fundamental to Ember and how much of it could be extracted and provided at layer above? Because it would be great if you zoom forward 10 years from now for there not to be 5 major frameworks that all have their own slight tweaks on different ways of doing the same thing. If I was still working at jobs and I was changing jobs, every year or whatever, if something like Mirage was always used, it would be better than if there's 5 different tools, right? Even testing, I mean, obviously there's reasons for different things to be used and there's always trade-offs. But yeah, if it's something that's, so that just also made me think about that, like more common tooling.
Yeah, and even if it's not like the exact same tooling, it's like the same architecture, same patterns. Like active record pattern is used everywhere, but it's not the same code. But it's still, I can jump into a PHP or Python or Rails app and
Yeah.
pretty much understand what's going on there.
I wish there was in the words of Adam, a reactive record. I just don't. I do the functions. I mean, I just need to maybe like do like a full app in like a functional style, but like I just want to do .save. Like I just want it.
Oh yeah.
But like it's just not. I don't think you're gonna find any tutorial that has that. You know, you're gonna have like save to do, and you're gonna import it and all this. I just don't want to do any of that stuff. I just want to write Ruby more. I miss that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's nice knowing there's just one clean way to do it, and I like that way of doing it. Anyways, so yeah, that was my little experience with React. It was fun.
Very cool. I mean, it looks super exciting.
Yeah.
So I read this article about micro frontends.
You and everyone else in the front end development world, apparently.
I saw it was getting a lot of flack on Twitter.
Was it? Because I mean, you were the one who told me I should read it, and I had just seen a couple people tweeting about it in like DX versus UX, I think. Is that what the main conversation was?
Yeah, I saw a few people tweet about it. I saw some like snarky, the Twitter snark.
What did you see? Like what? You don't have to name names.
Just people saying,
what if we just started naming names on this podcast? Like we'll have a segment.
At UI developer 3921 said.
We'll have I've actually been wanting to add segments, like we're like, and now is the time of the show where we like wheel out a big wheel and like Ryan acts like he's an elephant, and I just spin it and people write in.
Can we get like jingle music for these segments?
Yeah.
Then I'm on board.
But we could have a segment that's like, burner. And you just, it's like, you pick a Twitter handle out of a hat and we're just going to burn it to the ground. What do you think?
Nice. I think Twitter's already pretty good at that.
That's true.
And we don't need to jump on that.
That's true. We could just like hold up our Twitter feed to the camera. Yeah. And like, that's the whole segment.
So you want to see someone get burned, go to twitter.com and just read the second tweet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, anyway, there was like, and okay, so first, anytime there's an article called Micro Frontends, it's like, this is some clickbaity stuff right here, yeah. And then you see, all the Twitter folks like, making just snarky replies. So I don't know what I was expecting. Like I was expecting it to be something like the microservices trend that was big a few years ago.
Yeah.
But I thought I didn't agree with everything in the article. I probably didn't agree with most things in the article, but I thought the article was excellent. Like I think it's absolutely worth reading.
Yeah.
And discussing about and thinking about like which of these things actually matter to your organization.
Yeah.
And which things don't.
So why don't you set the stage a little bit? And, can you hand me my phone as well? Because I wrote down a few notes while I was reading it.
Oh, so did I. Wow, we came prepared. So I thought the author did a good job kind of setting the stage of like what is some of the problems that happens with front end architecture, and like there's like, okay, you've got an existing app and you need to get like JavaScript stuff in there, and how do you go about doing it? It's not just just use React. Like you actually have to think how are we going to do this, and what sort of architecture strategies can we use? Mm-hmm. Also too, there's like, I mean, this is definitely something like we feel, but you have an SPA that's 3 years old. How do you take advantage of new stuff, new build tools, new libraries? And like the Ember answer there is like, kind of wait for Ember to support that stuff first class. And we know that there'll be like code mods and a great path forward. But it's a real problem. Like it's a real problem that teams face. Like we have an old front end. How do we take advantage of the new things?
It's interesting that you said that, because like situation we're in is different in a lot of ways that the situation we were in at TED, where we had lots of different apps, even using different technologies, but still wanting to take advantage of new technology ourselves in the projects we were working on. Whereas now we just have like some legacy code that's kind of been neglected that still works and still runs our business, but it's kind of different, but it's kind of the same too. I mean, the talk I gave at EmberConf, like my first EmberConf talk or whatever, was on the front end architecture stuff because of all like the stuff we were doing at TED with the front end build stuff, which is related to all this.
Yeah. Yes. So the author's answer to this, like how do you take advantage of this, is this idea of micro front ends. And he gives some examples, but like say you have an app, and that app has different sections. Like say it's like an online food ordering thing. You're going to have like a restaurant search. You're going to have like an order menu page. You're going to have a user profile page.
I can tell you exactly what you're going to have because I've ordered Seamless 4 times this week since I got back from Mexico and didn't go grocery shopping.
You know,
you're going to have an order again button right in front that makes it one press away.
When we lived in New York City, we used to order Seamless like 2 times a week. Like every Friday we would order. Then like, you just have those nights when you get home, you're just like, I'm going to order. We got a card. It was like a postcard in the mail that was like, you're in like our top 10% of users. Here's $25 off your next order. And I was just like, this is a worst thing you could ever send me because now I'm just not ordering for the next 3 months.
Right. The postcard has like a fat person on it.
I'm so embarrassed right now.
It's so funny. I'm like almost in tears because I'm just thinking like they're queuing up like the biggest postcard ever for me. Like, you know what I mean? It's just gonna be like a cartoon of a fat person smiling, like eating a bowl of like chicken pesto and being like, we had to create a new loyalty tier just for you. Oh my goodness.
Nice.
So that's the app, right? And there's like a profile and yeah.
And you can imagine, I mean, just think of all the apps we've worked on. Like there's different sections that have different concerns.
Right.
So the author's take is like, well, make each of these its own front end app.
Right.
And this is, if you're familiar with like microservices, this is kind of how you would think about the back end piece of this. You'd have like all the API calls to ordering would be in their own app, and all the API calls to your profile would be in their own app. So it's kind of like that idea applied to the front end app.
I see. So like if you were still using Rails for everything, but then your back end and data requirements became so complex. Ordering was like this asynchronous thing that dealt with like telephone calls with what's the service for Twilio and like background job for like whatever. And then like the other part was just like the database thing. And then you had like an email system with like promos. Those would all be separate back end systems.
Yeah. And there have been some really good talks on microservices, like the fact that like these systems can be small, they can be throwaway. You can not feel guilty about like rewriting them or refactoring them.
You could write them in Rust if you needed to, or Go because this one is a concurrent, needs a lot of concurrency or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Now there are trade-offs, and I think most of the back-end world knows this, and no one is.
They roll their eyes sometimes.
Yes.
The way it's talked about. Yeah.
Trade-offs, right? But the idea is that like, okay, so for a front end, can we do this? Can we do this? So there's a few different kind of approaches. One is like you have like a app container that kind of does like how we started this podcast. Like it might have like a bunch of global stuff, things that are shared amongst every single piece, like login and stuff like that. But then each of their own pages would be like their own app.
So like recommendations could be for the food restaurant delivery thing. It could be a team working on recommendations and supplying the front end code for that. Gets stitched in with it, but that's like one micro front end.
Yeah. And like you mount that on all the pages or all the templates that need recommendations. So there's some interesting things about this. So I think there's like pros and cons just that like immediately pop in our head. One of the pros was that, the team that's building recommendations is now going to own the whole recommendation stack. They're going to own like all the JavaScript that powers recommendations, right? But they're also going to own like the CSS. They're going to own the deployment. And I think that's really good. Like I think that's like a really good thing that like teams own the apps they build on. Where we've worked on projects where just like the design team comes up with all the CSS, the engineering team comes up with all the APIs, and then somehow those two things are supposed to just work together, and they don't.
Yep.
Now there's trade-offs here, right? Like if you have every team, especially for like the small site I'm describing, owning their own CSS,
right?
Things are going to get pretty inconsistent.
Right.
So,
no, that part of the article though did stand out to me too. I think specifically going through the deployment issue and basically what the entire Ember community went through 4 years ago, the Lightning deploy stuff, decoupling. Basically, everyone started having Ember in your backend repo, and then there was like one repo with like top level front end and top level back end. So they were like, that was one separation instead of having it like in your assets folder or like app folder or views folder in your Rails app. That was like step 1. Step 2 is like front end and back end. Step 3 is like 2 separate repositories. And that's like what we would do today. And I think that's like such a good thing because that unlocks, and like these days, yeah, it's kind of taken for granted. Like your front end, you just push that to Netlify or whatever. But that's such a clear bet. Like that was so huge. Yes. That was like, I still remember distinctly the first time we extracted one of the apps we were working on into a separate front end. And I like made a CSS change. I could just redeploy it. And it was like, yeah, the backend doesn't care at all about any of this. This is actually like a iOS app. It's like a mobile app that I'm deploying, and it doesn't have anything to do with the backend in this way. Like,
right. And we know that boundary, that seam is like super solid. So this is like testing it. Like, can we make that seam? Can we even split apart these front ends and these back ends even more so?
Yep. Those are, I think there's a lot of benefits in that category for sure. There's a lot of ticks in the benefits column. Although of course there's downsides too. I mean, even when we're working on one feature in EmberMap, we have 2 separate apps, and we've had a whole podcast episodes about 2 apps, the 2 app problem before.
And I can't imagine having N apps.
Yeah.
So I think for me to want to adapt that, there'd have to be like some really clear problem that it solves. Yeah, just because there's going to be a lot of trade-offs.
Now, specifically, just to clarify for listeners, you're not talking about the front end and back end split. You're talking about taking a site like what we work on with EmberMap, which is like a relatively small site that just you and I work on, and turning that into multiple front ends.
Yes.
There would need to be a very strong need for something to have that, and we haven't even gotten close to that.
And I would
basically haven't ever gotten close to that in any of the apps I've worked on, really.
Yeah, I think if we were going to do that, we wouldn't split out things like recommendations or like search into their own front end UIs. We'd split things like
the admin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An admin area and a front end, or like they have 2 completely different users and have 2 different,
I mean, the admin is actually a good example because we do have admin split out.
Yep.
But it's a separate app.
It's not embedded.
It's not embedded, and it's not cohesive. I mean, it's under the same domain. But and you could imagine if it used the same UI library, it would qualify as a micro front end in the sense that it's stitched together for one experience. When me as a user of embermap.com, I can go to admin and change something and go back and whatever. But that also shows some of the downsides, right? The cost, because our admin area has like fell behind. It's not tested. It doesn't use the same models, and there's like a lot of duplication, and it's like hard to work on it. It would be way easier. It would be way better if it was part of the front end.
There's some components that are in EmberMap front end that I want to use in the admin. And what do? It's just like, I kind of stare at the screen for like 15 minutes, hoping like the answer just appears, but then I like copy and paste, and it never feels great. There's a drift,
right?
There's hackiness. Some
of the other downsides. That's something else I wrote down was like, I just have a hyphen that's like Google mono repo, and it's just because like the idea of like Google's code base being a mono repo and avoiding so much of that kind of thing. If you were in a mono repo, you wouldn't ask that question because you'd be able to access anything in it, right? You could import anything in it. You wouldn't have to bump a version or anything like that. So that's a solution for a separate problem, but I think there's aspects of it that are similar to this, which is that as soon as you decouple things, you now have a notion of like dependency hell, and even in a small way.
Yes.
But you do have that. It's funny because the article talks about micro frontends push you to be explicit and deliberate about how data and events flow between different parts of the application, which is something that we should have been doing anyway. And as soon as I read that, I was immediately reminded of the DHH point when he was kind of talking against microservices a couple years ago and making the point that, you should be deliberate about how things flow across boundaries, but it's also easy to get that wrong. And it's way easier to change a method call within a single application than an API call across 2 services.
Oh my, yeah. I mean, imagine you had 2 SPAs on the same page and you need to communicate between them. Now you're just kind of like...
Yeah, and you need to change, and maybe you can set that up right once, but then you want to make a change to it. Now what do? You have to like change it, redeploy both, maybe in a backwards compatible. It just adds so much friction as opposed to a monolith where you just change a method and you run your tests and everything. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's a similar idea there. And I think that's like, I was just surprised how they were kind of like, it felt a little naive the way they talked about that. Like, oh, this is something you should be doing anyway. Well, yeah, but like it's super hard. It's the whole Yagni premature abstraction thing. Like whether it's a UI component that's being shared or the way you're passing data. I mean, that stuff changes all. You want to optimize for changing too.
Yeah, that's it. Because boundaries are super hard to get right.
Yes.
So when you want to optimize your code for when you get them wrong,
Yeah.
it's easy to make changes. And if it's a method call is easier to change than communications across two totally different apps that have their whole everything separate, deployment and bootstrapping and all that.
Now, I'm sure like this is completely different if you're working at LinkedIn and you have hundreds of engineers and you never want those people to stomp on newsfeed ever.
Yes.
So that makes sense. That's a clear boundary.
Yeah, I think that was actually one thing that I was kind of disappointed about this article is that they didn't really address like scale. I think scale matters here.
Mm-hmm, right. They weren't as clear about it as they could have been about saying like this is really for, they say use it when appropriate, but they don't say when that is.
Like a team that, hundreds of engineers is going to have totally different problems than, you and I on our little friends. So.
Or probably most, a lot of teams.
Yeah.
Who are under 10 developers or something like that. I still think there's a lot that could be done for those people, the middle class or whatever. There's a lot of moving parts to get that stuff easily working today. It's even just like what we talk about how Rails has an advantage because you can just render a form with validations because it knows from the HTML it's writing to the database tables. It knows it all. It can do so much more. Even if you're using an opinionated framework like Ember with an opinionated backend like Rails, you're still like you're losing 20 steps behind from the beginning. Now imagine that, your Ember app is 3 Ember apps.
There's
I don't want to imagine that.
Another thing I found funny about this article was that they talk about like how to organize CSS across these. And they basically, it's like 2 paragraphs and they mention like, oh, you could use BEM or SAS or this or that. And that's it. Mm-hmm. like I need way more direction. I'm going to start splitting
BEM? Okay, thanks. You solved all my CSS problems.
I need BEM. Way more direction and way more hand holding.
Right.
If you're going to have me split these. So I thought that was like, when I read that and I saw how little, and maybe the author just has, maybe if you're at a bar, he would just have a lot more to say about this.
Right.
But when so little is dedicated to like styling.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest problems.
Yeah.
So I was just like, okay, this is like, this is a little much. I can get into things I really liked about this article though.
Yeah, definitely.
There was a section on like, if you do split up your front ends, you're going to have things that are shared between them. And I thought he gave great examples of like the types of components you want to share and you don't want to share. Mm-hmm. So things like a button or a header or like a nav, like those things are shareable. Like things all your front end apps are going to want those. But you shouldn't want to share like the domain components. Like you don't want to share a product table. Right. Because your apps are going to have different meanings of like what is a product or even what is a table. Right. So I thought that was really good. Like there's this really good when you share components, the more presentational they are, the easier they are to share. So I thought that was like an outstanding, just
that was a section on like UI component library, and it was like 4 paragraphs long, and it was all solid gold.
Yes, yes.
Especially after some of the other parts of it that were kind of like scary out of the article, but it was all great. It's just talking about how hard it is to get those correct, how you want to start with having each team duplicate and do their own things. You want to instead of like prematurely abstract, you want to forage. What they said that you forage or harvest. Sorry, you harvest the shared components. So that's like, I love that imagery of like after you've already seen it in 3 places. Now let's make a button or whatever.
And there's so much that's good about that. Like it's actually being abstracted from real world use cases that like all developers and all these different micro apps have run into. Yeah. There's no Yagni. There's no there's no premature abstraction. Like it's
totally. He talked about like having you said a gardener or something like that. That wasn't the word. but it was someone who's responsible for it, because when everyone's responsible for it, no one is.
I love that line where it was like, so if you have a shared component library, who's responsible? And it's like, well, everyone, because they're all using it. And then he's got this great little thing. Well, in reality, then that means no one's responsible.
Exactly. Let me just pull it up because it was really good. Most obvious candidates for sharing are dumb visual, blah, blah, blah. Some tricky questions around ownership and governance. One model is to say that as a shared asset, everyone owns it, though in practice this usually means that no one owns it. It can quickly become a hodgepodge of inconsistent code with no clear conventions or technical vision. At the other extreme, if development of the shared library is completely centralized, there will be a big disconnect between the people who create the components and the people who consume them. The best models that we've seen are ones where anyone can contribute to the library, but there is a custodian, a person or a team, who is responsible for ensuring the quality, consistency, and validity of those contributions. The job of maintaining the shared library requires strong technical skills, but also the people skills necessary to cultivate collaboration across many teams.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's a really hard job. You have to have like an eye for product, an eye for like good code. Yeah.
Good really hard abstractions,
Yep.
general abstractions. This also tells me that this stuff is really good for bigger teams, because who can afford to pay someone to be a custodian of a design language, like someone who has a problem sharply, who experiences it sharply. Benefits of creating such a reusable library: reduced effort through reuse of code, visual consistency. One of the easiest, I'm just going to read this because this is so good too. One of the easiest things to get wrong is to create too many of these components too early. It is tempting to create a foundation framework with all of the common visuals that will be needed across all applications. However, experience tells us that it's difficult, if not impossible, to guess what the components' APIs should be before you have real-world usage of them, which results in a lot of churn in that early life of a component.
So good.
That should be like that should be like in the intro guides to like every framework's website. For that reason, we prefer to let teams create their own components within their code bases as they need them, even if that causes some duplication initially. Allow the patterns to emerge naturally, and once the component's API has become obvious, you can harvest the duplicate code into a shared library and be confident that you have something proven. Yeah, really, really good stuff. And then, the most obvious candidates for sharing are dumb visual primitives such as icons, labels, and buttons. We can also, buttons can be complex though, right? I mean, we've made some pretty complex buttons.
Yeah, but they're always the thing that I want to share. It's like the thing that I always copy and paste between apps. So
we can also share more complex components which might contain a significant amount of UI logic, such as an auto-completing drop-down search field or a sortable, filtered, paginated table. However, be careful to ensure that your shared components contain only UI logic and no business or domain logic. I love how they say that right around the table, because the table is the thing.
Yep.
That's the hard boundary to get correct.
Yes.
Very hard. When domain logic is put into a shared library, it creates a high degree of coupling across applications and increases difficulty of change. So, for example, you usually should not try to share a product table, which would contain all sorts of assumptions about what exactly a product is and how one should behave. What's a talk?
Yeah.
Such domain modeling and business logic belongs in the application code of the micro frontends rather than in a shared library. So, it's really, really good.
Yeah, so that's the stuff. I mean, as a developer, that is the stuff that makes me super excited, because now, like, I own this component. I can do whatever I want for my app, for my problem. Mm-hmm. I think that stuff that's awesome.
Then they go into this section on backend communication, the backends for front ends.
Yes, this was another section I really liked.
Really, really liked this. We've talked about this a little bit before. I think Luke was the first person I talked to where I heard that concept. We were doing some consulting, and I think the client was wanting the API to be general purpose and used for multiple things, as well as like serve the needs of the app. And Luke was kind of saying like, you want to go one way or the other, or you don't want to do something just on the guess that it's going to be used general purpose, because building a general purpose API is very different than building a back end for a front end.
Yes.
And I think that's probably why we've seen GraphQL be so successful as well, because that really embraces that idea. And it says, whatever query the front end needs, it's going to be served by this back end. We're going to implement the GraphQL server for you so that your front end is completely optimized. And then any nasty work we need to do to coalesce data from different services and make sure you can get it all in one GraphQL query, we take care of that. There's this like website service that does that. Remember we were looking at it? You can say like GitHub stars.
You can like
Stripe,
compose
token, and MailChimp list thing, and you just do one query and it like gets all those things for you.
Nice.
Something like that. But that's like that notion taken to the extreme, like a back end for a front end, you know?
I mean, I really like that because in consulting projects that we've engaged on, it's often there's that question of like, do we make this general purpose API or do we do it for the front end? And our answer, I would say, is like 95% of the time is like, well, right now you're building the front end.
Paying us to build an app.
You're building the front end.
Yeah.
So let's make the back end for the front end.
Yeah.
And then when we need to generalize it, we can.
Yeah.
But
it's never. It's never going to happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. In our experience, it does not.
It does not. And even when it did at times like TED, where it would look very different than anything you would think of.
That's
the
true
data needs are being shared across different services, let's say, and the solution there is completely different.
It's very deliberate.
Yeah.
It requires like product and thought.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because those are being built for the front end of that consumer. Like those are being built for different consumers. So you want the needs of the consumer to always drive it. It's just don't make up consumers.
Right
now we have one consumer.
Yeah.
It's the front end.
It's the app.
Yeah.
Yep. The front
the
end
app
that we're building.
Yeah.
So I really like if the micro front end thing nudges your back end thinking towards that, I think that's a really good takeaway.
Yes.
That like, hey, you don't need to worry about solving 3 different apps problems. We just have a micro app. Just solve our problem right now and then move on.
Right. That's true.
So I really like that section. They had a name. It was, what was it? BFF.
Yeah, back end for front end. Yeah.
I like that.
It's really good. I mean, that's how we've been doing it for a while, but we certainly did not used to think about it doing like that.
Yes.
And then also using Mirage, you think about that as well, because like you design the bookshelves model first, and then you're definitely making it for the particular use case of the front end.
I mean, Mirage, since Mirage runs in the front end,
yes,
it's like the ultimate constraint for the back end for your front end, because it can't be used outside of your front end. It literally can't be used outside of your front end. So it is a back end for your front end.
Yeah. It's a BFF IF. It's a back end and front end.
In your front end.
In your front end. Get out of my front end, yo. Yeah, that's cool. You know, of course, there's the secret voice in my mind, in the back of my head, as I was reading this, which is like, you know, you always have that grass is greener stuff, and it's like the majestic monolith, where like these are the benefits, but like, no, there's companies who experience this stuff and they're real pain points, and that's why they drive to this stuff. But there's also a lot of incidental complexity based on the way the tools talk to each other or don't talk to each other today, that this stuff can lead people down a hole, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is like, I don't think we're going to be adopting this strategy anytime soon.
Not completely, but in some ways we already are treating our single apps as a single micro front end.
So yeah, and I like the way that you can condense. If you think about this, if you take this to like its logical conclusion, what things become apparent. And I like that, you know, building components out of real world use cases and then abstracting them and building backends specifically for front ends. I like that.
Deploying things separately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I like that this gets you like,
it's almost like 12-factor for modern front end development. It's like a 12-factor front end.
Yeah.
app.
Good constraint,
you
right?
know? Yeah, exactly.
I like that this makes you think. So when I saw like all this snark on Twitter, I was expecting like some silly article, but I didn't think this was a silly article.
I thought
it made you think and like, I thought it made you think and like how this could apply to us. And, you know, it might not, and we're not going to adapt it, but yeah.
Right. So what was the snark on Twitter?
You asked me that earlier.
Burner. Now it's time for it.
No, like
burner.
There were some really funny things. Like someone says, they were like, "Oh man, now I'm gonna have to have a meeting about this." That was a good one. Should we be adopting micro front end architecture? I read about it in the Wall Street Journal, and I think you all should really consider it. That's pretty good, Wall Street Journal. Thanks, marketing Steve. I read about it in Forbes. Forbes was talking about micro front end strategy, and I think it's time. Or someone made like a thing that was like all frames. They were like the original micro front end. And it was like a little image, a bunch of frames. Jason Miller. Yeah. So I thought that was funny. Yeah, it was just a lot. Like I think a lot of a lot of like the Twitter backend world rolls their eyes at microservices. And so when this thing came out, it was a lot of that, just like immediately building on the problems with microservices. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say it also you just made me think of like, remember the Ember Islands and the Ember cards and even Card Stack. There's a similar thread of an idea, which is like these micro apps.
Well, my immediate thought when reading this was Ember engines.
Or engines, right. And that was another point I was going to make, like with the boundary thing where, DHH is saying, oh, it's easier to change a method call. But like in LinkedIn's case, they wanted engines to enforce a hard boundary. That was actually a feature.
Feature, not a bug. Yeah, nice.
So whereas that would be like a huge bug for me if I had to go and change. Even now, when I have to go change something in another package or whatever, it's like sucks. Like Mirage Server and Ember CLI Mirage, even it's like, oh, maybe I should just like put all of these in the same repo because that's like why monorepos exist, right? Because there's actual like inconvenience and downsides when you switch things up. So there's trade-offs. So pretty interesting stuff. I guess the front end world hasn't solved everything yet, so we'll continue to have this debate. It'll continue to there'll be more learnings to come.
I'm trying to make a joke of like, when is the front end world going to solve everything? I don't know.
Maybe related. I was going to say unrelated, but maybe it's related. I just saw Ryan Florence tweeting about the differences in the UXs of like the Twitter progressive web app and the Twitter mobile app, and he was like, I've been there before where I'm like down on the web as an app platform. It's like, are we ever going to get to that point? There's a lot of complexity, all the stuff we're talking about. And it's like, sometimes I wish, especially as a front end developer, I could just open up like Apple SDK. I don't know what it's like to be an iOS developer, but I imagine this is what it's like. It's like that GIF with a guy like taking a shower or whatever.
All of a sudden the sun comes out, birds start chirping.
And you just use like NS list view, and you have like a beautiful like scrolling list with like awesome fluid, like back forward built in. And if the Twitter PWA team can't get something that's a little discouraging, because that's an awesome site, the mobile.twitter.com PWA, but it still is light years behind the basic gestures and stuff like that on iOS. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of like, what is a sweet spot? Like, what is like a real sweet spot?
There's so much that's great from a developer's perspective working on the web.
Yeah.
So much that's great.
Yes.
If you can publish HTML, you can give someone a link, boom, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But anyways, where are we at in time?
We are at 50 minutes.
Cool. What did you have in here? You wanted to talk about...
I just spammed this channel over the last week. It's like, I'm eating a great burrito right now. Let me put this in the podcast topics.
Have you listened to Jeff Goldblum on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend?
I think I did listen to that one. You like that one?
It's pretty funny. He's a pretty weird dude.
Yeah. He's a weird dude.
You were mentioning, folks who have done Ember and React, and now that I've been messing around with it a little bit, I just think it's a very interesting. Everyone has a unique experience. No one other than me, and the people like me, but if you've been doing React for 5 years, you don't know what it's like to use React for the first time today. You will never know. Same with us with Ember. Once Octane comes out, what it's like to use for the first time with all of the mental like baggage or the mental models that you're bringing from your other work into Octane, like that's going to affect how you think about it in the same way that my Ember experience affects how I think about when I'm reading about use effect or whatever, or use context. And so it's a very interesting spot to be in because you're getting insights that you're not going to be able to ever get again. Like where are the things I'm stumbled up on and stuff like that. So you had mentioned it would be fun to bring someone, who's done Ember for a long time and might be doing React now and compare. Yeah.
Definitely. If anyone has experience going from Ember and maybe they're like within the last year or two have started using React, would love to have them on the podcast.
Definitely.
And it's so much to like gang up on React or Ember, just more like how do you approach certain problems? How do you think about these things? Like what were some awesome concepts that carried over really well? Just similar how you were talking about, like needing a service. You had a mental model of a service. The reason I had this idea is because I know that there's, it's not like a secret. There's a lot of developers now that are switching from Ember to React, and they all have different reasons, right? There's no like, because of there are tons of different reasons. But it would be great to get someone on and just hear about that experience.
Yep.
Just like definitely like the higher level concepts that are transferable between the two.
Yep.
Would be super exciting.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be a great conversation. And, I've had some of those conversations in trying to figure out if it was worth bringing Mirage into React and into Vue and making it general purpose. And when I was talking with some specific React folks who had Ember experience, it sounded like a pretty similar experience to mine, where the lower level stuff, the functions are really nice to work with. And but then you miss things like Ember data because there's just nothing for you unless I still need to learn like Apollo and all that stuff, but I wanted to just use what comes out of the box first to understand how the pieces fit together. And it sounds like a lot of folks are in the same boat where they like end up having to make a lot of their own abstractions with this stuff, which they're wishing it was done for them by someone else, like someone who's thought about the whole problem. So that's the kind of stuff that I would love to hear more about.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting stuff. So cool. Very cool.
Nice.
All right. Shall we wrap it?
I think so.
Thanks for hanging out with us. If you like what you hear, tell your friends about the show. And we love talking with people about it on Twitter, and any other topics you want us to talk about, let us know. And guess we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.